When a man volunteered to serve in the Union Army during the American Civil War, it was the Army's responsibility to provide him everything that he would need to serve as a soldier. While in training camp, the new recruit received his uniform, his weapon, and his training. And he would also receive the additional equipment that he would need to live the life of a soldier. I'm Jared Roll from the Monroe County Local History Room and Museum in Sparta. In this video, we're going to examine the equipment the infantry soldier used and carried to get a better idea of what daily life was like for someone serving during the American Civil War. To understand better what a soldier needed for gear, I find that it's helpful to think about going camping. So I want you to imagine that you're planning to go on a camping trip where you have to carry all of your gear in a backpack. This is a camping trip that will take you into the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin for 1 month. What would you pack in order to survive outside? Remember, you have to carry everything on your back, so choose wisely. Have you thought of some things? Well, to live outdoors, you would need some sort of shelter to sleep in, and some sort of blanket or a sleeping bag to keep you warm at night. You'd probably want a change of clothing, and maybe even a toothbrush. What about bringing something along to pass the time in the evening around the campfire when you have a little bit of free time? Well, these items are very similar to the types of things that the Union soldier would bring from home or receive from the Army and then carry on his back while he served the duty of being a soldier. There are two important factors to consider when understanding what the soldier chose to pack. First, the soldier lived outdoors most of the year. Rarely did he ever sleep under a roof. Most days were spent working in camp or marching in pursuit of the enemy. The evenings were spent in a temporary camp of thousands of soldiers, all sleeping under the stars in all kinds of weather. The second thing to remember is that the soldier needed to be mobile. That is, he needed to be able to pack up camp at a moment's notice and then put it on his back and then march. Therefore, you want to pack as much as you need to be as comfortable as you can, but you also cannot overpack, otherwise you're going to risk being overburdened. Let's keep those 2 points in mind as we examine what's inside the soldier's pack that he wore on his back. First, the soldier's backpack is called a knapsack, and the Army issued each soldier one of these, and it was the place where the soldier would store those things that he needed that were not his weapon and was not his food. So the things, his personal items would go in there, and other things that he would need to serve as a soldier would be stored in here. Let's take it off my back and take a closer look to see what's inside. On the top of the knapsack, the soldier would strap down his Army-issued blanket. You can make out the initials, U.S. What does that stand for? United States Army. This blanket is made out of wool, just like his uniform is. And if you remember, wool is very scratchy on the skin. It is warm, but it's kind of scratchy. Well, why don't we unbuckle the knapsack and take a closer look at what's inside? Once we have it open, we untie these ties, and we can look inside this pocket to see what's in here. The first item that's in this knapsack is something called a rubber blanket. Now, rubber is being a fairly new invention for the time, but what it is, it's a piece of canvas that's been painted on one side with rubber. So on one side you have just plain old canvas, the other side you have rubber. How it was used is that the soldier would lay this down on the ground and then sleep on top of it, and that would help keep the dampness out. They could also throw it on their back when it was raining out and use it like a poncho. Oh, you may have noticed I have a gaming board painted on the underside of my rubber blanket. That was fairly common that soldiers would do that because, hey, it's easy to transport this game now, isn't it? There's something else inside this pocket on this part of the knapsack that is related to shelter. This is his shelter half. Now, a shelter half is a piece of canvas, but there's no painted rubber on it. But when I hold it up, you can see it in its full size. It's not very big, is it? How does this become a tent for one man? Well, it doesn't. This is one half of a shelter. You would button another person's tent along the edge, and together you would have one complete tent. This is only one half of it. Now let's take a look at the other pocket in this knapsack to see what's in there. Inside this other compartment would be other personal items of the soldier. For example, extra clothing. In here we have some extra clothing, but not a lot. Clothing is very bulky and it will weigh you down, so you don't want to have more than what you need. Here, what this soldier has in his knapsack is an extra pair of drawers. What are drawers, you may ask? Well, they look like pants, don't they? They are pants. Just put the word under in front and you've got it. These are underpants, and they were issued to the soldier. In addition to underpants, a soldier might carry an extra shirt. Some soldiers would write home to their families and say, I don't like the scratchy wool shirts that were issued, especially in the summertime. Can you please send me a shirt from home, a nice linen shirt that was lighter and smoother on the skin? But this soldier has another coat in here. This is part of the uniform. It's called a frock coat. A frock coat is a blue coat like the one I'm wearing, but it's the more comfortable of the two. It's the coat that the soldier would have worn when he was in camp doing hard work like cutting wood and digging holes and so on. Rounding out the clothing, we see that this soldier has an extra pair of socks in here. Soldiers, again, never liked marching with wet feet. It's not fun at all. Oftentimes, the young ladies or the women of a community would gather together and create supplies that the soldier might need. This is one of those supplies that soldiers often ended up receiving. It's a portable sewing kit. Since a soldier wouldn't have his wife or his mother around to repair his clothes when he tore the seat or something, its nickname was called the housewife. Now we get into some more personal items of the soldier that he would use to take care of himself. Each soldier was issued a bar of soap about this big of a piece for each month. Now some months they received no soap, other months they received a little bit more, but not a lot. Again, remember, these guys rarely had the opportunity to take a bath. Sometimes if they came across some running water, they would jump in and swim, bathe that way, but other times it's just washing up with this bar of soap with a little bit of water. Now, talking about sanitation and taking care of yourself, soldiers were plagued with bugs. Now, if you've ever gone camping before or been outside at a park playing, you know that mosquitoes are an issue, sometimes biting flies. But the worst insect that troubled the armies, both north and south, was something called the grayback. What was the grayback? Lice. Head and body lice. And it was a plague to everyone in the army. Didn't matter if you were a lowly private or a high-ranking general, everybody suffered from lice. It's what happens when you have all these people together in a confined space, these thousands of guys in camp. Ugh, just another thing to make the experience more miserable. In addition to the bar of soap, the soldier may carry some other items to take care of himself. Let's continue looking through this soldier's knapsack to understand better what he carried and what life was like for him. What if you had some free time, you may ask? Well, if you had some free time, a soldier may read a newspaper. This is an example of a national newspaper called Harper's Weekly, which was popular at the time. And in this newspaper, the soldier could read about the war. Now, he doesn't know a lot about the war because nobody really tells him anything because he's just a lowly private in the infantry. But in here, he can read about what happened at the last battle. How did everybody do it? Who won? More importantly, a soldier would write home and ask for a newspaper from home because that's how he's going to stay connected to his home community, is reading the local newspaper. Speaking of reading and writing, a soldier would also keep something called stationery in his backpack. We're talking about blank pieces of paper, envelopes, stamps, pencils, because the soldier would write home. And we're so fortunate that they did, and they wrote home often. because many of these letters still exist today. They were saved by the families, donated to archives and museums like the one I work for, and we can read them today to get a better understanding of what life was like for the soldier. When they're in camp, soldiers were kept very busy. They had to cut down trees for burning wood, they had to help make roads, they had to dig holes for latrines, which is their version of a bathroom or a toilet. They had to be on guard duty. It was a lot of hard work. But in the evening, the soldiers would have some time to go around the fire and make their meals, write a letter home, read some letters, read the newspaper, or they could play games. One of the most common pastimes in camp was gambling. The most common game, poker, or a game called euchre. So in my knapsack here, I have a set of playing cards. These playing cards look a lot like our playing cards today, except if you look carefully, you may notice that there's something missing on these cards that we have on ours. Inside this soldier's knapsack is also additional ammunition. When soldiers were told to prepare for battle or engaging the enemy sometime soon, they were typically issued extra rounds of ammunition, extra bullets, and they had to carry these with them somewhere. So sometimes they were put in their knapsack. Now, wrapped inside this handkerchief are some of the smaller items that belonged to a soldier, but items that meant a lot to them. First, let's take a look at this green thing sticking out. This is called a greenback. A greenback is a unit of currency issued during the Civil War. This was the first time in American history when paper currency was issued on a national level. How much did a soldier get paid? A lowly private, someone who's very new to the Army, would be paid $13 a month. Was that very much? It wasn't. It was about the same as you would pay a teenage boy to work on your farm. But at least it was something that the soldiers could send back home to their family, because back at home, their wives and their children are struggling without dad there to help them farm, keep the farm going. So maybe this money could be used for hiring someone to help out on the farm, or so that the wife could go and buy the things that she and her family needed from the store. Other men would use this money and they'd gamble it away. What else is in this little book here? Let's take a look. Well, I mentioned writing earlier. Writing was very important for us today as we study the history of the Civil War, but it was very important to the soldiers as well. During the Civil War, soldiers would write home, and then they in turn would receive letters. And getting a letter when you were a soldier was like Christmas morning for them. It meant everything to get a letter from home, because it's in the letter where your heart is. The soldier's heart is here. They want to know how their wife is doing, how their kids are doing. What about his friends that enlisted in the Army the same time he did? How are they doing? That information will be contained in this letter, and the soldier's going to read it over and over and over again. There's no communicating by phone. There's no going home. It's through letters. What else is inside? This is a little photograph. It's called a CDV, or a carte de visite. And it was a relatively inexpensive form of photography for the time. Photography was very new, but this was a way at least he could get one photograph of his wife and his youngest child. When he sees that young child again, that child isn't going to know who he is, because he's not going to be home for a few more years. But anyway, he can look at this photograph at night, and as he prays for his family, as he writes home, he can think about them and look upon their faces. And then inside this book, what is this book? This is what's called a pocket testament. It is a small Bible, and many soldiers carry these. We have to remember that the experience of a Union soldier, and basically everybody who fought in the Civil War, their experience was a pretty miserable one. They were exposed to the elements, either too hot or too cold. They were always wet. They were eating food that wasn't nutritious for them. They weren't drinking enough good water. They weren't getting the nutrients they needed. They were sleeping outside and not getting quality sleep. And then there were the other things, the psychological things they were suffering from. They were lonely. They were bored. They were haunted with nightmares from the last battle they experienced. All these things and more going through the soldier. How do you deal with it? Well, one way that the soldiers dealt with it was to keep a Bible with them, and they would read the words inside and receive some sort of hope and encouragement from this. Death, it was a very real thing for the soldier. So keeping a Bible close was something that he could do to feel like he could be a little more ready in case it was his turn to go. And that pretty much rounds out the most common items that were packed in a knapsack of a soldier. Examining the contents of the knapsack and learning more about what a soldier carried when he was in the army helps us better understand what it was like to be alive and serving as a soldier during this time. In general, being a soldier was a pretty miserable experience, but we're so thankful that they did serve, because these men left their families and their villages and they put themselves in harm's way serving in the army. A whole group of people got to experience freedom who otherwise may not have ever had that. I'm Jared Roll. Thank you again for watching this video. I hope to see you sometime at the Monroe County Local History Room and Museum in Sparta, Wisconsin.